Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to the 15th episode of the live Q&A session. Right, we've done 15 sessions. That's like an amazing feat. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for supporting us through this entire thing. Uh, Today's session, we're going to have a focus on how to prepare for the quant section of the GMAT. Right. As always, we had few questions coming in from some of our users, and like we're going to start answering those questions. The three questions that have come are basically questions which are not quant specific. I'll quickly run through them. I'll answer those questions. Subsequently, we'll look at quant specific questions. Before we proceed, I just want a go ahead from you. Yeah, that audio is clear, video is clear, so like we can get started with the session. One of you, Nimishka or like Pratap, if you can like say that you're able to hear me, you're able to see the video with the thumbs up, you're good to go. Are the audio and video clear? Can I get started? Yeah, thanks, Pratap. Yeah, super. Right. We'll get started. I'm going to start with the first of the questions. There is actually a theme to all three questions that we got. All these three questions are people who are reasonably senior executives, people with quite a lot of experience, and asking whether they should go for the GMAT and what prospects exist. We'll start with the first of the questions. I'm going to be 35 and was planning to prepare for the GMAT. Would age be a factor for MBA admissions? Is this question, right? Uh, I'm not going to give you anything which is not a straightforward answer. Yes, age is going to be a factor. 35 is a little bit on the outlier side of the age, right? So I've answered that bit first. But having said that, our experience with students who are reasonably aged and who have gone ahead and done their MBA has actually been fantastic, right? I'll take names of some of those people. We had Vimal, who was 35 when he started his MBA. He scored a 750 in the GMAT. He went into Ohio and completed his MBA from there. Shweta did an MBA a little late, and then she went into USC Marshall and like graduated from there. We had Kavin, who had an MBA from IIM Lucknow and then went in for a second MBA in Purdue, and he was also 35 plus when he went in for this. And all of them had very good schools, and incidentally, all of them went with 100% tuition fee waivers. And in fact, Vimal not just had a tuition fee waiver, even he had a stipend, he had a scholarship which paid for his living expenses during his stay at Ohio. So we have people who have gone with 35 plus age and then did either a second MBA or a first MBA. Actually, all of them did their second MBA. They did justice to their MBA. They got brilliant offers. They got wonderful places where they are placed and they're doing very well. So, yes, it is going to be a little bit of a tough ask in terms of convincing the business school and also convincing a potential employer as to why they should recruit you, right? It's not going to be as easy as someone who comes with a median age profile, someone with 26 to 28 years of age who is getting into a business school. Is going to be the median, is going to be the middle bulge, right? If you look at if I can do a normal distribution curve, they would easily account for about 60% of the people who are basically applying in business schools. So their proposition is going to be very different. So if you're going at 35, you can convince them, but you need to take effort to sell your story and then make sense out of it. So this is essentially the gist of it. Is it going to be easy? It's going to be a little bit more difficult. Is it still worth doing it? It certainly is worth doing it. Look at it. If I can give you some kind of a how one can map it. Let's say you're an engineer from India and graduated. I have to keep moving my mouse every now and then so that the screen does not go off. So just bear with that, right? So thing to keep in mind is that 21 is when you would have graduated from engineering college. And if you're 35 right now, you've worked for about 14 years. Let's say you do your MBA starting at 36, graduate at 38. Typically, people have a professional experience these days which spans at least till you are 60. Sometimes it goes even to 70 because if you're working for a company, retirement age might be 60 or 65. But if you're on your own or if you become a consultant at a later date, it could span as much as 70. So let's even stop at 60. We're talking about 14 is done and another 22 ahead of you. So essentially, you have 150% more of your career available than what has gone behind you. And if that 150% more, as in if it is X right now, 1.5X is available to you. If that 1.5X is going to be on a faster trajectory, is going to be on a trajectory which is different from what you want right now. Probably you're working for IT sector right now. You want to get into something which is like from a sell side IT to a buy side IT. You want to get into some other sector. You want to shift domains. You want to shift industry. You want to shift geography. All of that is going to be possible with an MBA. So it's certainly worth it. It's going to be a little bit tough, but it's definitely worth all the hard work that goes into it. Take the next question. This also is from someone who's got reasonable amount of experience. I'm 33 years and I have 9 years of post MBA, Indian MBA from a premier business school experience in India and Gulf region. I'm looking to migrate to Europe or the US and currently preparing for GMAT. Which one do you recommend? 1 year or 2 year program? I'll start with that. Right. Second MBA is certainly worth it. There are few schools which would say, hey, we are looking for people with the first MBA. Keep something in mind. If you graduated from a premier Indian business school and you have 9 years of experience, if let's say it's from an IIM and you did it before the IIM Act was passed, you're probably likely to have a PGDM, which means that you would not be thought of as a person applying for a second MBA. Because there are certain schools, for example, Haas would say that don't apply if you're applying for a second MBA. So if you're from an IIM, you escape that by virtue of having a PGDM and not having an MBA degree. So you can apply to many of these places. It certainly is worth it. The distinction I'd like to make is big chunk of the schools in the US, their flagship programs are basically 2 year programs. The large majority of the programs in Europe, the flagship program is 1 year program. So 1 year or 2 year is dependent upon which geography you are going to. If you're getting into a good school in Europe, likely that it's going to be a 1 year program, with the exception of something like London Business School, which lets you complete your MBA in 15 months or 18 months or 21 months, right? That's a brilliant option that they're offering. So leaving that, many of them would be 1 year MBA programs. If it is US, many good US business schools also offer a 1 year MBA, but those MBA programs are not their flagship programs. 2 year MBA is their flagship program. Don't worry about an extra year spent in the US. It's really going to be helpful. As you probably know, by working in international regions like Gulf and other places and coming from a premier, you that cushioning. 1 year MBA, before you blink, it's all over, right? Here in a 2 year MBA, you get to do a 10 to 11 week of summer internship, by which time you can actually impress upon them and get a PPO possibly. So many of those things come in handy. You want to graduate, and by the time you graduate, you want to have made the shift that you're looking for and also land up with a good job. So all of that, the 2 year MBA is going to give you that cushioning. And 2 year MBA, as you probably are aware, is not necessarily a 24-month program. The way it works is you start in the month of August or September, you graduate by April. So let's say 8th month is when you start, 4th month, a year down the line, 1 year later, you're graduating. So it's a 20-month program is what we are looking at. 12 months versus 20 months, 8 extra months is definitely going to be meaningful if it is the US. So US, Europe, 1 year, 2 year, that basically answered the question. US or Europe, US has many more schools than any other region taken together. So your chances of landing an admit is much higher in the US region. But having said that, I would like you to look at something. So you asked which colleges or university would I suggest. I would want you to do a little more research. It's not something where someone can recommend openly to you. The simple reason, it's not about it's a trade secret or anything. It's just that you need to know what your ambitions are. Do you want to make a shift in domain? Do you want to make a shift in industry? What is it that you're looking for? Functional shift, industry shift? You're anyway looking for a geography shift, right? Typically, they call that people who tend to do all these three as a triple jump that's happening in their career. Triple jump, yes, has been happening last few years. In fact, in Europe, in a lot of good schools, about 30% of the graduates from those schools in the last couple of years, especially have managed this triple jump. They've shifted geography, they've shifted industry, they've shifted function, right? So you need to figure out what that is and which of these schools will best help you accomplish that is what you need to do. So do extensive research on the schools. Right? Having said that, US has a lot of good schools. I would like you to keep this perspective in mind. If it is US that you're going to, look at a program which is going to be a STEM program. Because STEM programs and a STEM job will essentially give you the option of a 3-year OPT instead of a typical 12-month OPT for a non-STEM MBA. So if it's US that you're going to, I would want you to keep this perspective in mind. If it is not US that you're going to, look at countries which are very immigration friendly. And this keeps changing from time to time. Right now, if I can tell you, Canada is very immigration friendly. Germany is immigration friendly. Post-Brexit, UK is also very immigration friendly for people who are doing higher education, especially from premier schools. So if you go to London Business School, Judge, SAID, Imperial, right? Any of these places that you go to, you're likely to be in that favored list of people who could get work permits and like the time to stay in the country, visas to stay in the country after you complete your MBA program so that you can land a job, right? So keep this immigration in mind when you're selecting the country, right? One is every country, for example, France has got 2-3 good schools. London has got few good schools, right? Three, four good schools. Germany has got two, three good schools. So pick schools. Germany, the medium of instruction is English. But to make sense and get a job in Germany, same holds good for France. You need to have good language skill, right? Unless you are having reasonable amount of comfort and prowess in conversing in German or in France, as the country might be, right? Your possibility of doing justice to your MBA from there is a little limited. So learn your German before going there. Learn your French before you go there, if it's these countries that you're going to. Right. So keep that slightly longer perspective, not just the MBA, not just the scholarship, not just the tuition fee waiver, not just your possibility of getting an admit. What after all of that? Which are these countries that are going to help me immigrate? Where the possibilities are? Because you're doing this, your objective is to relocate to these places. So keep that perspective when you're going there. If it's US, STEM MBA. You cannot even have a second idea about it, as an opinion about it. Necessarily, a STEM MBA increases your chance of finding a job, staying in a job, and then getting a work permit H1 and the likes after that. Right? I think I've answered your question. Move on from here. Third question, very interesting profile. 37 years working in the hospitality industry, 60% in 10th with 33 in math, 51% in 12th with history and politics, graduated after 15 years of my 12th standard, want to study now, take the GMAT. Is it possible for me to even try this? Certainly would say give it a shot. Give it a shot, because if you get a decent GMAT score, when I say a decent GMAT score, anything upward of 680, it could open doors to you, right? There could be schools which might be looking for people who have a consistent track record, but there are schools which are looking for people who have interesting stories. I think the kind of profile that you've had and the way you have narrated it, you can make for a very good story as to why you want to do an MBA and how your career has progressed and how you realize that education is meaningful to you right now, and how and why you're doing what you're doing. So all of these are things that could really help you if you manage to score that 680 in the GMAT. Preparing for the GMAT and writing the GMAT is just the first step, and it's a good first step. If you crack that 680 plus, that gives you a lot of confidence in the fact that you can face the interview board of the admissions committee and basically kind of convince them that yours is a story which is like very interesting and the narrative could make sense to you. So my suggestion is please give it a shot. It could possibly take you 6 to 7 months, not because of anything. If you're 37 years of age, then the time between that last you studied something, right? Though you have done your graduation 15 years after your 12th standard, probably 3, 4 years since you finished your graduation. So the kind of, you would have lost touch with studies. So to build back that momentum, to break that inertia, might take you about 30 days to 45 days. Give it that time. 6 months from now, you would definitely be able to take the GMAT and aim to get a 680 plus. Anything upward of that is wonderful, and it's going to help your case tremendously. Right? That note will basically get started with the questions that have come in the chat window. Pratap's question, stuck at 48, how to reach Q50 and above? Right. Okay. See, stuck at Q48, that's a good place to get started, right? I don't know, when you say stuck at Q48, uh, uh, the way I would look at it is like, what have you done to move out of Q48, right? The test in which you got a Q48, please do a complete analysis of it. Do the analysis on the following parameters. Is it a typical kind of question type, right? In quant, obviously, we are talking about problem solving, data sufficiency. Do you get more data sufficiency wrong? If that be the case, then you know that conceptually you're okay, but you're having a problem when that same concept is translated into data sufficiency, that you need to work on understanding the mechanics of data sufficiency. It's not just understanding the mechanics of data sufficiency. I think all of us know the mechanics of data sufficiency. If statement one alone is sufficient, then we'll say AD, leave out BC, so on and so forth. I'm not talking about that mechanics of data sufficiency. What I'm actually talking about is basically looking at how do I look for counterexamples? Is this a question for which I'll go with a counterexample, or do I go with a logic, or do I look for some kind of a concrete algebraic solution so that I can establish that the statement is sufficient? So make those amends to the way you have been analyzing questions. I would say for each of those questions, go through the explanatory answers, check out how you can improve upon your analysis and make sense of the data sufficiency. If data sufficiency is your problem, I would go to the extent of saying solve at least another 300 DS questions, that you kind of get that in your bag, that you're able to move from this Q48 to Q50. If it is not DS, it's not the type of question which is having a problem. It's a type of topics that's a problem for you. Basically find out. It could be inequalities, it could be permutation combination, it could be coordinate geometry, it could be rates problem, it could be problems which are word problems. Identify which are the ones which seem to have the biggest element where you've got things wrong. And this Q48 also, when you say you're stuck at Q48, did you finish the test on time? Did you take too much time in a particular kind of question? Sometimes you realize that you missed out the last three questions because you spent 7 minutes in a question. So do a complete analysis. If need be, get help from someone, right? Get help from, if you are going with some test preparation company, get time from your tutor. Ask the tutor to basically take a look at this entire test and see what is the thing that he or she can spot in what you have done. That those two, three fine tuning could take you past this Q48 to Q50. It might require solving 300 DS questions. It could just require understanding that these are three topics which I take a lot of time. I probably should not be investing time in that. That you see those questions somewhere, you say, okay, this is probably my nemesis. I'll leave this and move on. Your score will actually be better because you're not spending too much time in that. So do analysis of the test that landed you in a Q48 and then see if you can. If you can do it all by yourself, wonderful. But if you think that some external help will help you, take help from your tutor and then go forward with that. Right. Money, I'm finding difficulty with a few concepts like geometry and permutation probability. It's giving me nightmares, to be honest. How can I cross this bridge? Few things. Permutation probability, typically in the GMAT, is about 2 to 3 questions. So if it is permutation probability, which is one of the topics in which you have a problem, I would say just go through material on permutation probability. See if you can solve about 100, 120 questions in these two topics taken together. Suggestion is, once you're done that bit, you would be reasonably comfortable with the, let's say, template questions that come in it, right? That's essentially what is going to happen. So any template question that appears from this, you'll be able to nail it. But if anything that comes slightly different, it's not the usual thing that you've learned, skip it. 2 to 3 questions in probability and permutation taken together. If you answer 2 out of the 3, if you answer 1 out of the 2 right, the other one that you did not get right, perfectly all right. You don't need to get all questions right to even score a Q51 in the GMAT, right? So keep that perspective in mind. Geometry, that's not the case. Usually about 20% of the questions come from geometry. Geometry, when I mean, it includes the entire plane geometry, coordinate geometry, and solid geometry taken together. Check out which areas you have a problem. Quite likely that it's not going to be solid geometry, because solid geometry is a bunch of formulae and applying them and getting it right. It's volume, surface area kind of thing. You should not have a problem there. Coordinate geometry, the regular stuff, up to the 650, 700 level questions, you should again not have a problem, because it's very, very templatized to that extent, right? It's going to be like areas of triangle, it's going to be length of a line segment, it's going to be slope, it's going to be equation of a line. So these are the things which are tested. Only when it crosses the 700 level question, and if you get a coordinate geometry there, could it be a little tricky. So leave those out for the time being. Get your landscape in place. So you need to know, for example, let's say you're traveling from point A to point B in whichever city you are living. I'll take an example of someone living in Bombay. If you know that you're going to travel from Worli to, let's say, Malad or like Bandra, you know, these are the places where I'm going to have a signal and it's going to be time consuming. So you'll have to budget for going slow there. And there'll be some places where you might be having a C link and you'll be able to quickly go through that particular area. So you need to identify the questions that within coordinate geometry, if it appears, you'll be able to get them in a minute, minute and a half and get them right. And you also know these are some of these tricky questions. To even comprehend what is said there is going to be difficult. Say that, hey, 1 or 2 such questions is the maximum I'm going to get. So I'll basically leave that out. This is for coordinate geometry and solid geometry. These two, you will be able to get many of them right. You should not have a problem. I will not say the same thing for plane geometry, because plane geometry involves a lot of concepts, lots of theorems, and like tying a lot of those things together. For example, a lot of properties in circles come from properties about right triangles and isosceles triangles. If you're not sure about your properties about right triangles and isosceles triangles, right? If you do not know what an altitude is, how an altitude is different from a perpendicular bisector, many times people draw perpendicular bisectors of triangles, which necessarily, according to them, will have to pass through the opposite vertex, which need not be the case. It will pass through the opposite vertex only for equilateral triangles and for one instance of isosceles triangle. So there are lots of such little things to keep in mind and keep track of when you're solving plane geometry questions. So only thing is, again, of the 7 questions that you're likely to get in the geometry arena, right, 3 are probably going to be plane geometry questions. Another 4 are going to be from the other 2 topics, coordinate geometry and solid geometry. Do about 150 questions in geometry. The same advice that I gave to Pratap, right? So once you've done that, you get Of the 4 questions, 1 or 2 would be the template questions. You will be able to get them. That 1 or 2 which are a problem, just leave them out. When I say leave them out, you're totally leaving in geometry and permutation probability, which account for a third of this. You're likely to leave about 3 questions, 2 in geometry and 1 in this, which still will keep you in the Q50 range. But you need to ensure that if a question that comes from percents, profit loss, rates, simple interest, compound interest, any of those things, statistics, averages, you definitely will have to get that right. More importantly, identify what will not work for you in this entire exercise. Don't say the entire geometry does not work for me. Don't say the entire permutation probability does not work for me. There are easy questions within that, and there could be tricky questions within that. If an easy question comes, your practice, your learning of it in a structured manner should see you through. Tough question comes, that will leave it, and we can still manage a Q50. We'll take the next question. I should have set this screen going off to a slightly longer time. I missed it, so therefore I have to do this. How many right answers for a Q50? I think, Neeraj, uh, see, this is a slightly difficult question to answer for the simple reason the GMAT is an adaptive examination. And therefore, there is no one right answer to it. But if I have to give a ballpark thing, up to 3 questions, not necessarily, you should not get 3 in a sequence wrong. Those are things which make a big difference to how things work out, right? Up to about 3 or 4 questions wrong, you will still be able to get a Q50 in the GMAT, right? So therefore, don't say that, hey, no one budgets to make mistakes, right? You want to do things right. It could end up being wrong. So asking this question is valid. Up to 4 questions, you're likely to 3 to 4 questions incorrect, you're likely to get a Q50 in the GMAT. Right. Uh, should I attempt the quant first in the GMAT? Couple of things. See, these are very personal choices. In the way why I call it personal choices is if I were you, I would do the quant first because I teach quant. Quant is very much my strong point. So I'll say, let me do the quant. I'll go on a high into the verbal. Verbal is, I'm not as strong in verbal as I am in quant. Therefore, I would like to do verbal second. There are others who will say, let me get rid of what is tough for me first, so that when I go to the second one, it's completely up my alley and I can really do justice to it. So if you could say, like, let me finish verbal, so that's not at the back of my head, can move out of verbal, and then any day, any time, any question that comes in quant, I'll be able to do justice to it, that I could do quant second. One way of doing it is basically take 2 mocks, taking quant first, verbal next. And in any case, don't do IR AWA as the first sections, right? Keep them as a third lot, right? And do 2 mock tests with verbal first and quant second. See what your scores are. Typically, you should try it with the MBA.com test because if you try it with some other test prep companies test, those are basically mimicking how this test engine of MBA.com, the actual GMAT test works. So do it with these and check out where your scores are better, or one is where your scores are better. Second, equally is as you pace the test, you'll get the feeling that these are the places where I'm doing very well. And that, if you think that quant is, you feel better doing quant first than verbal or vice versa, stick to that and go on with that. Right. Anyway, how can I improve myself for a good GMAT score, sir? Uh, first and foremost, split your GMAT preparation into 3 phases. The first phase, get your concepts in place, right? Many of us think if you just solve questions and get them, we can move on. Hey, it is like not having a backup plan to do everything right. Is it like, it's like investing in a stock market where you don't analyze about the stock and basically go with a tip and invest and then hope for the stock price to go up. It could go up, need not go up. The same happens when you just purely practice questions without having your concepts in place. So round one, you probably give about 4 to 6 weeks time, get your entire concepts in place. Subsequently, part two, as part of part one also, you'll solve some questions. Part two, exclusively use it for solving questions. Take 5-minute tests, take 10-minute tests, take 5 questions in quant, do them in 10 minutes, right? So you do time tests, get adequate amount of practice in phase two, and address issues both in terms of time and in terms of correcting your concepts. So this would be another 4 weeks. So about 10 weeks has gone into this. The last phase, basically take full length mocks. This is for quant as well as for verbal. When I'm saying that 6 weeks, it's not just for quant. You also plug in concepts of verbal. Similarly, when you're doing practice for 4 weeks, you'll plug in practice for the verbal section also. The last 2 to 3 weeks, take about 7 or 8 mock examinations, full-length mock examination, and go for it. Right? So typically your GMAT preparation would be anything from 13 to 15 weeks. That's what you need to budget, which is when you'll be able to do justice to it. If you're preparing exclusively for GMAT, for example, you are a marine engineer or you're working for the armed forces, you've got a 1 month sabbatical to come and prepare for it. Then you probably have 8 hours in hand. A month is enough. What I'm talking about this 15 weeks time is for someone who can invest anything from 2 to 3 hours for preparation for the GMAT. Pratap, should I solve OG advanced level quants? Is it necessary? I would definitely advise that you take the OG Advanced as the third of the OG books, right? Probably after you've started taking the mocks. Simple reason, the OG book, the big book that you have, which has all of these sections in it, right? It has questions spanning at multiple levels of difficulty. There are questions which are 400 level GMAT questions. There are questions which are 700 level GMAT questions. So it actually, to a large extent, many of the questions lined up in the official guide main book are graded questions in terms of levels of difficulty. Right. So you would start from an easier question, move on, make progress, and go ahead. Whereas when you start with this advanced OG, I think all of the questions, all 150 questions in quant are at least 700 plus questions. Some of them are like mind-boggling questions, lovely, beautiful questions. But having said that, if you start preparing with the advanced OG guide, it could actually set you back. It could demoralize you. You will not know what to do. You'll think that the GMAT is this stuff. You're probably going to see 3 to 5 questions out of the 31, which would be of that level of difficulty. So you should not start with advanced guide, but you should end it with advanced guide, especially if you're aiming for a Q49 plus in the quant section. So it is, I would say, go ahead and do it, but do it toward the end. Don't do it upfront. Upfront could demoralize you. Pradyumna, my question is GMAT waiver college or GMAT college for is GMAT waiver college or GMAT college for MBA in US? Hey, GMAT waiver was on, especially during the COVID phase. But even then, look at it. One of the things to keep in mind is that the Indian applicant pool is a very competitive applicant pool, right? Which essentially means that there's so many of us who apply for so few seats which are there in a good college. So if you have to keep your application competitive, if you want to present yourself in competitive light, you necessarily will have to tick all the boxes. We can't afford to not tick any boxes. GMAT is a very important box to tick. For the simple reason, we come from a different education system. We come from, as in, even within India, there are so many universities. There are universities, private universities, deemed to be universities. We'll say that like in college A, getting a grade 0.9 is CEC, whereas in like this particular university, getting even a 6 grade point out of 10 is difficult. So many differences come into picture. Yes, the business school is probably aware of many of these things, but a GMAT score is common to all of us. Having a 700 plus GMAT score suddenly puts you into the top 10 percentile of the people who apply for the MBA program. If you have a 750, then you're basically in the top 2 percentile of the people. So this basically positions you very well. Second, it's not just that many times when you apply for a visa in the US, if you have the visa officer is going to ask which school did you get into and like what is your GMAT score. They very well can ask you for a GMAT score, what your GMAT score is. They could ask you how are you going to fund your education. Scholarships and other things do not come through the GMAT waiver route. You necessarily will have to take the GMAT, and they're anyway in the post-COVID era. So I think to stay competitive, not just from an admission perspective, in terms of getting some tuition fee waiver or scholarships, and even in securing your visa. And subsequently, let's say you have a 730, 740 GMAT score. Your summer internships, you have a good case to present. You can say, hey, I've got a 730 in the GMAT. That's a talking point. That's something that people basically showcase in their resume when they're applying for their summer internships. So I would definitely recommend that you should take the GMAT because it goes a long way, not just in securing an admit, as I said, much beyond that too. Right, let me take the next one. Pradyumna, again, where do I get ROA GMAT from? GMAT preferred college. You could visit the college websites, as in go to usnews.com, list down the colleges based on ranking. It could be an overall ranking, it could be the field of study ranking, the specialization that you want to do, and then look at whether they are giving you basically GMAT waiver. Right. Nimishka, I'm a commerce student. I'm facing slight difficulty in solving math questions since math wasn't part of my syllabus, neither in UG nor in PG. What should I do, like basic, to get back on track? See, Nimishka, one, start with the easier questions. that you gain confidence in the entire process, right? And start with the easier topics, right? If you can list down topics which are friendly topics to start with, percentage, profit loss, simple interest, ratios, mixtures, rates, which are like speed, distance, time, pipe systems, work time, right? Statistics subsequently. So these are all easy topics where you can solve questions, understand, because the line of reasoning in all of these things are minimal, right? If you go to geometry, there's a lot of concepts that are thrown in. If you go to number properties, there's a lot of concepts that are there. Permutation combination. After having solved 300 questions, you can throw a 301st question, which is a tricky question, and a person might fall into the trap. So leave these topics to the end. The ones that I mentioned, those are places. Profit loss, there are probably 3-4 lines of reasoning. How do you compute profit? How do you compute loss? What is percentage profit? What is percentage loss? What is discount? Right. This is all that is there. And then questions are basically differently worded based on this concept. You do that, that gives you 2-3 things. One, you understand those topics. So you're covering a lot of topics. You're putting a checkbox on these topics. You can move faster there. So that is one big advantage. Third, as you practice with questions there, willy-nilly, you're also getting practice into computation. What we don't give too much credit to in any of these examinations is that understanding the concept is one part. Easily anything from a third to half of the time that we use to solve a question goes into actual calculation. So you solve 1,000 questions, 800 questions from the easier topics. And many of these arithmetic and easy algebra topics are topics in which there's a lot of calculation involved. These calculations get you kind of used to numbers and get comfortable with numbers, that when you reach the tougher topics, which probably don't have too much calculation, but there you would feel that, hey, I know these two multiplication should result in an odd number, whereas I see 3 answer options with an even number. Let me back substitute only these two and get forward, right? So those kinds of insights get better once you solve these questions. So start with the easier topics, easily solve about probably 1,000 questions in the easier topics would be a tipping point before you touch things like number properties, inequalities, geometry, permutation probability. Right. Let me go. How important is a proper split of my score among quant and verbal in the GMAT? Hey, it certainly is very important. One is the overall score. You can say a 700. The 700, how did I get the 700? The 700 comes from a Q51 and let's say a V31 or something. It still is a 700 as a 700, but it is not as valuable as a 700, which had a better split. So if I have to give you one number money, that number is going to be have a Q49 plus, which is a comparative score, and have a V35 plus. V36, V35, those are comparative. V35 plus, Q49 plus are comparative numbers. So again, there will be quite often that we would be comfortable in one area than another. So if you're batting for a Q51, ensure that your head is above water. What is that head above water for Indian students? I would probably think that's a V35. If you're super good in verbal, like say Shweta is, right, you should probably bat for a V47. Not that Shweta did not score well in quant. She scored a 50 in the quant section, which is again a super good score. Then you could possibly settle for a Q48 or a 49. 49 is still good because 49 is a 74th percentile. We're talking about a quarter of the GMAT test takers managing that. So you need to get there at least. 49 in quant, 35 in verbal are the absolute benchmarks from which you should, that's a starting point if you're asking for a balanced good score. Right. Agrima Badhyay, there's a lot of questions that Shweta has answered, so I'll skip those and come here. Is it possible for me to score 710 plus in 3 months? I had been average in math throughout my school years. Yes, 3 months is sufficient to do justice to get a 710 plus. As I mentioned, if you had been average in math, then bat for a 49. The quant 49 translates to 74th percentile as far as the GMAT goes. So 26% of the GMAT test takers manage it. So it cannot be something so out of the way, except that it's not that easy either. You need to practice. I'm not kind of trivializing it. Then see that you score well in the verbal section. A 38 in the verbal and a 49 in the quant should basically see you through the 710. And how many hours are required for preparation? 3-month preparation. So give or take, that's 90 days, clock in 2.5 to 3 hours. My suggestion is this 3-month, if you can manage the last 10, 15 days completely out of work, I presume you're working. So if you can get last 2 weeks off, find some way, tell your boss, tell your company, give them that advance notice that this 2 weeks I'm not going to be available for some reason. That 15 days, if you can set aside, clocking about 6 to 7 hours a day, initial part, about 2.5 hours on average should do. And the 2.5 hours average also, you might be able to do probably an hour and a half or two during the weekdays and you should make up for this during the weekends. That's sufficient. Give or take 300 hours of preparation is what we are looking at. Nachiketa, what is the suggested time to complete a complex question in the GMAT Quant? Uh, See, a complex question, the easier questions, right? You will be able to solve quite a few of them in about 30 to 45 seconds. The tougher ones, I would say don't go beyond 3.5 minutes. And again, I would like to draw one fine distinction as to how to go about it. See, when you're doing this entire test, whichever section, I'll take with the quant section, right? 62 minutes, 31 questions. Right. So you should have a kind of a timeline and a milestone, right? By the time you finish the 10th question, the first 10 questions, because it's an adaptive engine, are going to be easier. And you would have read in many places, not getting too many wrongs there is important. All of that granted. But they're the easier questions. Those are the questions where you should be able to score very well. At that point in time, if you're taking too much time, you would find yourself wanting toward the end. So my thing is, you should probably bat for an average of a minute and a half for the first 10 questions. So when you're in the 10th question, on the clock, you should have 47 minutes left. So you have 21 questions to go there. The next set of questions, right? Next 10 questions, which are in the 20th question, you possibly should take 2 minutes per question. So which is 10 questions, 2 minutes, 20 minutes gone. So you should have 27 minutes on the clock. So last 11 questions, you have 27 minutes, right? So you're talking about roughly about 2.5 minutes available per question. Some of those questions you still will be able to solve in under 2 minutes, that it would average out that you can do justice to it. The important thing is, let's say in the end of the 10th question, you don't see 47 minutes available to you. You see 43 minutes available to you. Don't panic. Essentially, you have lost 2 questions worth of time. So in the next 10 questions when you're doing it, if you find a question which seems to be your Achilles heel, right, which is the question in which you typically tend to make a mistake, that's a question you should happily say, go on, I'm not going to even touch you. Because if I touch you, it's going to take me 3.5 minutes. And oftentimes when I solved it in my mocks, I've not got it right. So skip that question and move on. If you do for 1 or 2 questions in the next 10, you would have done the catching up. You'll probably find that you have again 27 minutes on the clock with 11 questions to go. So this adjustment I want you to do, not having it as like, is it a complex question? Is it an easy question? What might be complex for me might actually be easy for you because you're very comfortable in that particular subject. And it could be the vice versa. So pick what is your nemesis, if I can use that word. What does not work for you? You need to know that cracking these examinations is knowing which 3 or 4 questions I'm not going to solve. Q51, yes, you can score Q51 with 1 or 2 mistakes. That's the truth, right? So no one bats for going wrong, but you also know this is a place where I usually tend to make a mistake. If you spot that, I would rather skip it. If that question happens to be my 29th question out of the 31 questions and I have 10 minutes in hand, that's a lot of time in hand to basically give it a shot. But if it is my 14th question and I don't want to get into a trap there, I would probably sacrifice that question and move on and do justice to the questions that come later on. So it's more of a test-taking strategy that you need to employ there. Right. Nihar, LOR from former employer is important, or can I ask my college professors to? See, if you have work experience, business schools will definitely look at LOR from former employers, and especially maintain a relationship. If you've shifted jobs, right? Don't burn your bridges. Say Happy Diwali, Happy Dashara, all of those things to your ex-boss, and like keep them in good humor. That you would have an opportunity to go back to them asking for a letter of recommendation. It need not be your present boss. It could be your ex-boss. It could be a boss from a company that you left. But if you're continuing in one single company, it could be a boss from a previous division, right? Basically, keep good relationships going on. If you have not managed it till now, it's time that you kind of reinitiate the conversation and get into their mind space, so they'll be able to give the recommendation for you, right? College professors will work if you're applying for MIM, if you're a fresher out of college, and those programs, it's perfectly all right. But anyone with 2+ years of experience applying for an MBA program, it's an employer that they're going to be looking at. Just a minute, I'm picking the next question. Roger Matthew, can you tell me a few tips to be remembered when solve large word problem? Don't try to solve a large word problem in 2 minutes. Take 3 minutes. If it's a large word problem, there's a lot that is written there. You need to grab it. The way I typically go about it in such large problems is I would read the first piece of information and try and translate that into a pseudo math equation. Right. Basically, they say like A and B travel from point A to B starting simultaneously at with a half an hour gap. I'll basically draw a line which will say, essentially say A started at 6 and B started at 6:30. I know they didn't start at 6 and 6:30, but in my mind that clearly says that there's a 30-minute gap from where they started, right? So once you have read one sentence, make some information. It could be a schematic, it could be a pseudo equation, but make sense out of it. Don't read the full paragraph, right? Some of these word problems, I agree, they are as big as a CR argument, right? You're not going to be reading all of that, right? Read the first line, get meaning out of it, first sentence. If you have some cohesive information from it, that's a time to basically translate into something mathematical or schematic. Then go to the next part, then go to the last one. Make sure in any of these things, not just in word problems, make a clear demarcation as to what the question is asking. Is it asking when did they meet? Is it asking how far from point A did they meet? Is it asking for the percentage profit? Is it asking for profit as a percentage of sales? What is it asking? Get clarity on that, note it down. If possible, say that here, they're asking for profit as a percentage of sales. So it should be profit by sales into 100. Just put a circle around it. That when you compute the profit, when you compute the sales, profit is computed always as a percentage of cost price. A question can reword it saying that how much profit did John make as a percentage of the selling price? The question can ask you to do that. In that case, you need to make that distinction. Don't always think that, hey, percentage profit is always calculated as a percentage of cost price, so I'll do it that way. That'll be one of the answer options which will have computed it that way, and you could go wrong. So have this clarity and move on. Only thing is, to answer your question, break each cohesive part, one sentence, half a sentence, make some sense out of it before you go and read the next. Don't read the entire thing in one go. Right. Uh, sorry, guys. What should be the study plan 30 days before the GMAT examination? This from Nihar. 30 days before the GMAT examination is the time you actually start taking your mocks, right? Give time time to take 8 mocks at least is what I would recommend. 6 to 8 mocks is what you should be taking. The first couple of mocks, when you take, the gap between the mocks can be as much as a week, right? You take the first mock. That's sometimes it could be a pleasant surprise, which case it is good. Sometimes it could be a rude shock. You would have done adequate number of questions, and then you take a mock, and then you see a 480 in the score board, and then like that's slightly rattling. And it's happened to our students who have managed to get a 750 after that. That 480 is not because you did not prepare well or you did not know things well. It's just that you're thrown into a system where you have to do it in one particular way. And the first iteration of that, you did not figure that out. You'd realize that, as I mentioned, you spent 7 minutes probably in a question. You did not complete the test. You did this, you read that, you were having difficulty with this. So the first test you have taken, let's say you scored a 480. That's the time to take at least a couple of days to analyze what went wrong, make a error log, make a plan of action that you need to do. Think of each of these tests as basically going for a blood test and seeing whether your disease has got cured. Right? This is not a disease, it's like a feedback loop. Right? You take this and hey, I need to work on these 2 topics. I need to work on my timeline. If I get this, I should always keep track of the fact that I don't over-invest in a question. Especially for guys who are reasonably good at quant, please do not have any ego issues with quant, right? I do take it every now and then saying that, hey, I'm a quant tutor. How can I not get this question right? And I end up spending 4 minutes after having advised all of you not to do that. So don't fall into the trap. If you're good in quant, you have to actually watch it. People who have said, frankly, that I'm average in math, when you see a tough question, you don't have any ego issues. Hey, ye to mujhe nahi aata hai, so you probably leave it. The guys who are good in quant, who have scored a 99 in engineering in quant, who have scored JE, good marks and everything, you can say, this is a question, how can I let go? Let go. We are trying to score good in GMAT. We are not trying to get every question right. We are not trying to see how good you are in solving that particular question, right? So keep this perspective in mind. So last 30 days is basically feedback loop. First 3 tests, give test 1, probably a week's gap to correct things. Test 2, you probably move from a 480 to a 550 or something, or sometimes even a 650. If you had test taking issues, right, that could get corrected quite quickly. The moment you go there, then again, one more test, right? So 3 weeks, you probably do about 3 or 4 tests. Then toward the end, take a test every other day. Take a test, analyze, plug in the holes, go to the next test. That's what your last 30 days are going to be. Sorry, guys, I have to keep getting the screen back on. Okay, is it true that 3 questions are not evaluated in the quant section during the GMAT? Yes, we think it's approximately 3, right? The 28 or the 31 questions is what typically counts. This is something which you can infer if you look at the ESR. But having said that, how does that matter is my question, right? Do you know which are those 3 questions that do not matter? If you had known, then you would obviously skip it. You're not going to waste time on it. And if you had known, and if GMAT made you aware of it, then the entire process for which they kept those three questions as unscored questions, ungraded questions, that purpose will not be solved. So, yes, from a GMAT trivia point of view, three questions do not matter. From a test taker point of view, it's going to make absolutely zilch difference for us. You do not know which are those three questions. If you knew, obviously you won't waste time. But if you knew, then GMAT's purpose would not be solved. So this is good trivia, but irrelevant for scoring well in the GMAT. Nihar, one should official guide before sitting. Yes. Solving the official guide, I would go to the extent of saying is a necessity, right? That would give you a good idea. Before you take the mock, finish at least one of the official guides, right? I would go to the extent if GMAT is something that you should be serious about. There is no question of if you are serious about the GMAT. You should be serious about the GMAT. I would go to the extent of saying solve all three versions of the official guide, right? The full book, the quant review, verbal review, which together have about 700 questions. The big book has about 990 odd questions. And then you have 300 questions in the advanced. So all taken together, you would solve about 2000 retired GMAT questions across levels of difficulty. Those 2000, in addition to whatever you go with the test preparation company, would keep you in good state. And that plus 6 to 8 marks is adequate. Arun Kurop, does getting questions wrong initially affect the scores more? Yes, the way the algorithm works, people have figured out that if you get more incorrects upfront, that is going to impact your, because the initial ones, the GMAT test starts with a median difficulty question. If you seem to be making too many mistakes there, then the adaptive engine basically figures out that at the median level, which is typically a 550 level GMAT score, is a place where you're struggling, which means that it's going to take a little longer for it to throw tougher questions. Then you need to get many questions right before it can take you to a higher level of difficulty. So getting too many questions initially wrong is going to harm you. Two things, we don't have control over it. How do you say that I'm not going to make mistakes there, I'm going to make mistakes there? That's a call that we don't have. The thing is, having this information sometimes does harm to you. What people do is they tend to spend unduly lot of time, too much time in the first 10 minutes. They'll probably in the quant section take 2.5 minutes per question for the first 10. 25th minute is when they'll be at the end of the 10th question. Whereas from what I told you, you should be there in the 15th minute. That puts pressure toward the end. So you would have got the first 10 questions right, but you probably will not attempt the last 3-4 questions, which is going to do as much harm as having got the first few questions incorrect. So the thing is, watch out, do a double check, but don't do 8 checks before you mark that answer and move on, right? That's essentially the perspective. Move on from there. How important is IR and AWA in my application process? What is the average recommended time for preparing for the 2 sections? IR and AWA are things where I'll give you numbers. 6 plus in IR, 5 plus in AWA is good enough. Beyond that, it probably is not going to make too much of a difference to your application process. If you're planning to apply to, let's say, consulting jobs, if you're planning to apply to, let's say, investment banking jobs, then probably there having an 8 in the IR is going to help you. Timeline for preparation. For AWA, I would say give or take about 10 to 12 hours, right? Understand how an AWA argument essay is written, get those perspectives in place. Pick the MBA.com website has got the bunch of AWA arguments that they present. Pick some 20 of them, identify fallacies in them, jot down that, and write essays for 5 to 7 of them so that your writing practice is also in place. So 10 to 12 hours is what I would say is what you should invest in AWA. IR, give or take about 30 hours is what you need to spend, right? So together, don't invest more than 50 hours. These are important sections, but believe it or not, people still talk about GMAT as it's a 730 or a 740. And after that 730 or a 740 is when someone is going, hey, what is my AWA? What is my IR? So they're important. You need to keep your head above water. 5 in AWA, 6 in IR is head clearly above water. Right. Roger Matthew, never taken a competitive exam before. Can you let me know what things I can do to calm my nerves before the examination? Sometimes you take adequate mocks, right? There are only a handful of good mocks available for the GMAT. So I would say go to the extent of saying practice with other mocks, take a few GRE mocks, take a few CAT mocks, right? The more you take, you kind of get acquainted, you get attuned to how you basically time the examination, how you pace the examination, how sitting for those 2-3 hours means, right? We had a student way back in like 2008 or 9. He said that concentrating for 3 hours was a problem for him in the GMAT, and he used to take back-to-back 2 GMATs. I will never go ahead and recommend that to everyone, but it worked for this gentleman by name Arvind. He said, if I can concentrate for 6 hours, I'll be able to do justice for 3 hours. And he scored a 740 in the GMAT. So essentially, getting adequate practice puts you into that mind space saying that this is something I've done it over and over again. That when you actually hit the real examination, your nerves are they're psychologically you're in a space which is not something which is going to unnerve you, right? Do I need to get both OG and OG quant review? Yes, certainly, definitely is worth it. What you invest in it, both in terms of money and in terms of the time and effort, it's worth it because if that could take you from a Q48 to a 50, if it could take you from a Q50 to a Q51, all of that effort would be worth it. So I would recommend, please go ahead. But the only thing is don't overwhelm yourself. As in some of us, what we'll do is we'll go and immediately order it in like Amazon and like get all the books in place and see such a pile of books. Actually, in my case, when I see a pile of books and I know there's so much to be done, I don't do anything. If I have one thing on my desk, right, I'm in fact one of those old school guys. I probably cannot have more than 3 tabs open in my browser. I've seen some of my colleagues' browsers, right? They can have 43 tabs and like they have this, I don't know, sidekick or something, which gives them multiple things to work on. All of those things unnerve me. So if you're one of those guys for whom having so many things overwhelms you, start with the first book, finish that. The moment you have finished it, then buy the next one. Amazon will deliver it to you in 2 days' time, not to worry at all, or your local bookshop probably has it already in place. So don't buy all of them and keep it, but necessarily do all of them. I took GMAT quizzes from Arun Kurup. I found OG questions are much easier, still makes sense to keep practicing OG. OG 1, the main book, the questions are easier because it spans multiple difficulty. If you go for the advanced version, they're certainly not easier. There's a lot in that that's very interesting. So if you've taken the GMAT twice and you want to improve your scores, apply for the enhanced score report first before you proceed with any other preparation for the third GMAT. Understand what did not go to your expectation in the first 2 GMATs, right? The ESR is certainly an eye opener. It'll tell you where you need to focus. Is it the timing that went wrong? Is it the concepts that went wrong? Where you need to invest in? And sometimes you'll say like, hey, I probably think I've not done well in sentence correction, but you might have actually done well in sentence correction. It's a reading comprehension which might have pulled you down. All of those insights come from ESR. So invest time in ESR before thinking whether it is OG, whether it is more marks, whether it is verbal, is it quant, what you need to work on, get clarity there. Subsequently, the quant review, verbal review, whichever area you need to strengthen is going to help you. If you've done only the main OG, advanced OG to top everything up is going to be very helpful. Right. Drumel Karya, if I study every day for 1 to 2 hours, how many months is sufficient for a good score? Assuming the quality of studies done is good, having adequate amount of practice questions and 5 to 6 marks given. About 3 months' time is what you would require if you can invest about 1 to 2 hours. And as you said, quality time 1 to 2 hours. The 1 to 2 hours is like actual study time. It's not the time that includes planning for what to study. Like 2 hours, about 3 months, you should be able to do justice to it. Ritesh, how long will it take to prepare for the GMAT? A very similar thing. It depends on where you start and how much time you have in hand. 300 hours of preparation is a ballpark number. The 300 hours can be spread over, let's say, even as little as 1 month to 40 days and can be stretched to as much as 6 months. See, think of it as something like a race where a GMAT preparation should be something like a 200 to a 400-meter race. It cannot even be a 800-meter race. You don't prepare for a year. You don't prepare for 2 years for the GMAT. Similarly, you can't prepare for the GMAT like the way you do a 100-meter dash, right? You can't prepare for it in a week or a week and a half. Definitely, you will find some influencer stories in the YouTube, and you'll find influencer stories saying that on blogs saying that how they just woke up one morning, just went and wrote the GMAT and got a 770. They are not telling anything that's not true. It would have worked for that person. It's like saying that the late Sri Dhirubhai Ambani did not do any education and built the biggest empire, so all of us should not do that. Dhirubhai Ambani is a legend. He managed it. But for most of us to be successful, we need to have a good education, so on and so forth. Similarly, those influencers and those legends who wrote those blogs, who woke up one morning and wrote a 770, they could manage it. So 1 week is inadequate. A year is stretching it too much so that you lose momentum in your preparation. Adequately, if you look at it, to do justice to it, give yourself something from 3 to 4.5 or 5 months. Stretch it probably to 6 months. Beyond that, no. You should be done with it by then. If you're stretching beyond that, then I'm sorry, you've been lazy is the only thing I could say. Just a minute, guys. If you were to take a month of sabbatical and prepare, how should I squeeze in the mocks with the preparation? If you're preparing with a month in hand, keep the last 10 days for the mocks, right? You would still be plugging in some amount of practice and other things in addition to the mocks, but last 10 days mocks, first 20 days to round up. And you need to give yourself 6 to 8 hours, probably pack it as 2 hours with 2 hour gap in between, right? You can't sit for anything more than that and do justice to it. Before you start anything, just drop a clear study plan and pick any of those project management tools that are available. Say, I should finish this, move on, and then get clarity on that. Midway through, you can course correct, but you can't be planning on a day-to-day basis. You need to have a 20-day course completion plan, 10-day mock plan, and in the 10-day mock plan, feedback loop has to also be plugged in. 30 days is sufficient if you can plug in 8 hours. Nishant, should be practice verbal only from OG? See, practicing only from OG is not sufficient. You probably need some other material also to help you go with it because OG is a set of test questions. You're asking about practice alone, but you probably need someone to give you as to how to approach these questions and other things. So only OG is not sufficient for any of these sections. But if you're asking only for practice, anyway, you would have taken help to understand the concepts somewhere. The place that you took help to understand the concepts would provide you with some practice. On top of that, OG practice alone will do. Taking stifles. How can I enroll and purchase the course as a non-Indian student? Just send us a message on 9500048484. Sometimes international credit cards do not work directly on the existing payment gateway at Wizako. So we'll send you a payment link, which basically is a Stripe link, and you'll be able to complete the transaction. Send a message to 95000. I think one of my colleagues has basically given it to you on the chat. Right? Send a message. Either Shubhra or like Sai will get in touch with you and help you with this process. Right? What is the course modality? Interactive class or recorded? We have both versions. The live online class is two-way interactive. It runs on Zoom, runs 4 days a week, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. IST. So keep that perspective. I do not know which time zone you are from. If it's a pre-recorded course, that you can do it any time of the day. It's available for anything from a 4-month duration to a 12-month duration. Both versions are available. If you're taking the pre-recorded, I would recommend go for the pro because it's got verbal also. If it is live online, it's got everything in it, right? Rachna, is it to prepare from an older OG 20? Yeah. I think you don't need the latest version at all. Not much has changed. In fact, between the 20 and 21 edition, I don't think there is any change at all. 21 and 22 edition, there has been zero change at all in terms of the questions. Any one OG, which is probably 2015 and later, anything that you can lay your hands on, that's good enough. That's good enough. Right. Nihar, I've scored a 690, the third GMAT official mock test. How long do you think I should study before I give the exam? Got a 550 when I wrote the GMAT. I'm nervous that the 690 is not my score. Do analysis of this 690 and see what is holding you back, right? I would recommend, Nihar, if you're going with some test prep company, take their help in helping you guide through this because 690 onwards, it's like understanding where to do that feedback. As in like 550 to 690, absolutely fine. I think most students can manage it themselves. 690 onwards, sometimes taking help from someone who has seen other test takers and what has helped them and seeing how your test has gone would definitely make a lot of difference. Super, guys. Super. Thank you. It's 8 o'clock now since we started. Thanks for staying back with us. Just want to end this on one note. See, we are in August, right? Many people think that probably August is a little too late to start their GMAT preparation. From a round one perspective, it's cutting it a little too fine, right? As someone had asked, if I have a month of sabbatical to prepare for the GMAT, you'll still be able to catch round one. But round one is not the be all end all. Round two is a place where many of them have applied and have got scholarships. Up till round two, you'll have scholarship. We've had students who've gone to schools like Mays Business School in round three application cycle and got scholarships for it. So it is possible that you can get a scholarship definitely in round two and also in round three. Don't push it to round three. Round two is in the month of January or December, and is when the application deadlines are. Start in August, we are in the 8th month. You're going to be applying in the 12th month or January, which is early next year. So easily you have about 4+ months in hand. 3 months is sufficient to do justice to your GMAT preparation. Get on with it. Getting into a business school a year earlier is always a welcome thing, right? I'm one of those guys who says getting into a good school is more important than when you get in. Certainly, yes. I'm not going to go back on that word. But if you're going to get into the same business school, if you can manage to get in this year, it's better than getting into it next year, right? So see if you can push yourself to doing that. And sometimes setting this tight timelines is when we actually work. Give yourself 14 months to do something that can be done in 4 months. You're not going to do justice to it. Give yourself 90 days for something that you can do it in 4 months. You probably will do justice to it and will crack it really well. That note, good night and best wishes for your GMAT.